stand firm forever. His intentions can never be shaken. What joy for the nation whose God is the Lord and whose people he has chosen as his inheritance. I want to remind you and I this morning, first and foremost, that God has an incredible plan worked out for us. And that plan was set in the foundation of the earth. It's fascinating to me that we talk about the love of God being demonstrated in Jesus giving his life, the very Son of God. We lived in a parsonage when our kids were small and had this beautiful big picture window. It had a beautiful big backyard. We counted as many as 25 kids playing out there at one time in our backyard. It was wonderful to sit at the table and watch neighbor kids I didn't know who they were. I didn't know who their parents were. I didn't even sign a liability contract, a hold harmless agreement. Rarely did I have to go break up a fight. But I want to tell you something. If any one of those kids would have started to pick and beat on my kids and hurt my kids, I'd have been off that chair and out that back door faster than I can even think about moving now. And God knew when he created the earth and created human beings that someday he was going to let the neighbor kids stretch his son out on a cross and kill him. But he chose to do it. And not only did he talk about it and tell us he was going to do it, he also told us that after he died and rose again and went to heaven, that someday he was going to come back again in the clouds. And in the meantime, he told us that life wasn't necessarily going to be how we liked it or how we'd become accustomed to it. And then he said these words, "Trust me." Notice this. What it begins to tell us about God and our country. There's times God frustrates the plans of nations. But he has this plan that's going to stand forever. And then he says, what joy the nation. For those of you who know the old King James, it says, how blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Yeah. There is a difference when a nation is obedient to God and serves him. And you and I are living in the effects of a fallen country or fallen world where our country has chosen to choose not to follow God as we know God, but to allow false gods to creep back in, or know God, or let every man do what is right in his own eyes. But God has this incredible plan. Secondly, I need to remind you this morning more than anything that God watches over you. Now, we talk about that term, but what does that really mean? I mean, I know a lot of people that watch things in disgust. I know a lot of people. I was at a place one time where there was a group of widows that lived in retirement homes up in the hills of Kentucky, and there was a children's home down below, and I am convinced that the news got around the top of the hill up there before it actually happened on the ground. In other words, there are people who watch over as busybodies. You know who I'm talking about. They know what's going on in the neighborhood before you do. I had a neighbor one time that looked at me and says, "Do you know you got a hole in the side of your house out there?" And I said, "Where?" It was there. It was up in the corner underneath something. I left it. I figured if he was looking at that, he wasn't watching other things going on at my house. But the Lord watches over. The intent here is that God watches over and intervenes. One of my favorite scripture passages comes from Ephesians chapter 2, and it's just two simple words. I'm going to take them right out of context. Don't do that. But God. Paul writes to the Ephesians and he says, you guys were lost, you were full of sin, you were seeking your own way, you were doing your own thing, but God, who is rich in mercy, changed your life. He watches over, and then he does a but God in your life. And most all of you can sit here this morning and think of a time in your life when you were about to have something bad and nasty happen to you, but God stepped in and changed it. Is that the stories you're looking for, Donna? For those of you who don't think you can write to Donna with a but God angel story, you got one. But God, who is rich in mercy, stepped into your life and helped you change it because he was watching over you. How many times have you said, there go I, but for the grace of God? God is not just looking and going, yeah, Linhart did it again. He messed up again. Well, he may be saying that, but at the same time, he wants to be involved in the lives of his people, and he's involved in his country. Habakkuk is a fascinating book if you haven't read it. It's 3 chapters in the Old Testament. Habakkuk, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He goes out on the mountaintop and he prays, and his prayer goes like this: hey, God, when are you going to do something about those pagans, those Medes and those Persians? God says, I am. Habakkuk says, what? God says, you wouldn't recognize it if I told you. Habakkuk says, try me. God says, okay, I'm going to bring them down. They're going to destroy Jerusalem. What? How can you use the pagans to destroy the righteous? Well, you have to read the rest of the story to know. But the Lord watches over and he gets involved in his people's lives. And even when they came in and destroyed Jerusalem, 50,000 of them were carried off to Babylon. Habakkuk said, how can you destroy the holy city? We're special. God says, I'm involved in my people's lives. When your child is in the crib, you get involved in his life when he cries and when he fusses and when he says, come and get me, because you're watching over him. When your child is fussy or the neighbors are picking on him, you get involved. I know, and it's getting worse because some of you are helicopter moms. When our eldest was about 2 years old, he fell down. We were in a well-meaning church member's home at the time, who was grandparent age. And he fell down, and I started laughing. And she said, so my. I said, laugh at him. Why? I said, watch this. And I pushed him down, and he started laughing. Our kids didn't cry when they fell down and got hurt. They laughed. Their dad's got a sick, twisted mind. I did not abuse him. He landed on a diaper. But God watches over. Trust me, if someone else was pushing him down, I'd have been involved. I think we tend to forget that God is roaming the earth, and he's ever present here. And even though the prince and the power of this world is around, God is too. And more than anything this morning, I want you to know this whole thing has not surprised God. He's watching over us. Secondly, thirdly, we're 3. I want to talk about God's promise. We put our hope in the Lord, for he is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone. Who do you trust for your eternal welfare? I know a lot of people and put it on an election. I want you to know something. I trust in something higher than our government. My God is greater. And my God has filled me with his hope and his peace and his strength through a lot of tough things in my life. And my hope is in God. I have not given that hope up. God's intervention probably sounds like the other one. The Lord looks down in verse 13 from heaven and sees the whole human race from his throne and observes all who live on the earth, and he made their hearts so he understands everything they do. I'm fascinated with a characteristic and an attribute of God known as free will. I am so glad that God gave me free will. I'm concerned about some of you with it, though. I'm concerned about my kids with it. Jason and Nana's all excited about having a baby, and I says, yeah, wait till Kaylee gets here with her free will. There's not enough parental controls, is there? As much as we talk about locking them in their room till they're 30, it doesn't work. God gave us free will, and he is so committed to free will that he will let you and I booger ourselves up, mess up our relationships, destroy our lives. Because we don't trust in him alone. Jesus says, you can't trust God and mammon at the same time. And that whole idea was about money. But let's take it a little further. Let's take it away from money this morning. You cannot trust God in this world at the same time. This world has a course that wants to destroy you. It wants to gobble you up, eat you up, use you up, and spit you out. And it's based on the father of lies. And we either have to choose that way or we have to choose God's way. We have to trust which one of them. Story I read years ago talked about a father who wanted nothing to do with God and a mother who wanted everything to do with God, and they had this one precious daughter who they both tried to influence. And it was intense. And the young girl got very, very sickly ill. And as she laid in her bed dying, she looked at her dad and said, whose way do I choose? Can't have both. Whose way do I choose? And Dad says, choose Mommy's. God will intervene. There is a but God in our lives. Let's talk about some practical things. May or may not have come out of this text, but they're incredibly, incredibly practical for now. Number one, we need to trust God more than anything. We live in a day and age where we need to put our dependence upon him, whether it's for our government or our own personal lives or how we handle life. We need to fully understand that God has his plan. He said he'd produce it. He's worked in our lives, and he's going to do it. Secondly, we need to develop our own testimony. In other words, we need to live it out. We need to watch hateful statements. I think I was so appalled at 3 o'clock the other morning because of what I saw boiling, or didn't see boiling for a long time, and how we've all in our country has really kind of grown an intense hate for a lot of things. And it was boiling out as a house divided. It was boiling out as one party against another. And as the election and the campaign ads that just were so filled with hate, I think it boiled over. And it's not so much that it was the tipping point that caused it, but it was there. And we've got caught up in it. And we need to come back to understand that God said, I cannot hold hatred towards one another. In fact, Jesus said, if you hate a person in your heart, you as much as have killed him. I lived for 14 years in a pacifist community. So you couldn't be angry. You couldn't hurt one another. I discovered that when I did counseling, I needed a tool in my office, and I do not have it anymore. Don't need it here. You know those big, old wiffle ball bats that were like this big around and about this long? I kept one of those in my office. And pretty soon, verbal assassination would begin to happen between couples. You know what I mean? That kind of subtle stuff that most people let go, but it was intense. And so I would pull that bat out and I'd reach over and I'd hand it to the woman. And I says, instead of saying that the next time, would you just hit him? Well, I can't do that. Sure you can. Hit him. Go ahead. We won't tell anybody. Hit him. Nobody will ever know. Hit him. Never had the first woman to do it, by the way. Why, I couldn't hurt him like that. And I says, but you're doing it with your words. Did you grow up with that little adage, sticks and stones may hurt my back, but words will... What a lie. We need to develop a testimony that's reflected upon treating others. Jesus said, love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, pretty straightforward. Fourthly, we need to turn our rights into responsibilities. I think one of the things that's caused so much anger and frustration in our society is that we are concentrating upon our rights instead of our responsibilities. It's kind of like, I want my ice cream and cake. Yeah, we have the right to pursue what? Happiness. How does that go? Yeah, that one. And we have that. But we have pushed it so far that it's only about my rights, and we've forgotten that a lot of my rights stop where yours begin. And we are so concentrated upon our rights that we don't want to think about responsibilities or being responsible. And I think we need to flip that around and go back to take care of our responsibilities first, rather than all the rest of it. Pursue happiness and you'll lose it. You'll never get it. It's like nailing Jell-O to the wall. It just doesn't happen. But people are pursuing it with everything they have and becoming empty and hopeless. And fifthly, we need to talk to God. I hate to say that to Christians, but the percentage of time that people spend talking to God is horrible. God says, come into my presence with confidence, with cleanness, unashamedly. And yet ask the average person to pray out loud. No, you're going to talk to God. You're not talking to other people. Don't worry about the other people. You're talking to God. Or we've limited our prayers to simply, God, give me. Instead of understanding that the whole idea of prayer is being in the presence of the Creator. I can't tell you how many phone calls, texts, or emails I get from my kids saying, hey, Dad. In fact, the latest one came with a picture of one of those night lights out, security lights outside. What do you think? I says, it looks good, but I'm 1,000 miles away. His response was, oh, I forgot that. I love it when my kids call without an agenda. Hey, Dad, I got to, no, that's okay to talk about helping out in their houses. I understand that. But, boy, the times when it's just, I don't have anything special in my mind. I just was thinking of you're not called. And yet, we turn around in our prayer life, and the only time we want to talk to God is when we want something. Hey, God, I screwed up again. It's about being in His presence. Because I'm convinced there's something about being in His presence that makes the rest of it a whole lot easier to do. And I'm not talking about just an hour on Sunday morning. I'm talking about on a daily basis, allowing His presence to transform me. I'm still convinced that love and grace conquers. But boy, there's some times where justice plays in as well. No, I won't. Father, we're going to come to your table. A thing that you started, first of all, to show us of your great love and your presence in our lives. An event that came out of a historical meal so that we could tangibly remind ourselves that in this broken body and spilt blood was reconciliation. In other words, we could patch things up that were impossible to patch. Then it's been called communion so that we can come together in common, knowing that we don't have a ground to stand upon in your presence outside of this event of death and resurrection. And then Paul went on to explain even further that we can't come and do this when we've got ill will in our hearts, or unresolved issues with you, or unresolved issues with others. That it's a time of cleansing. And maybe part of the most important part of it is that we look at it and say, I can't participate today because I'm angry at somebody. And I haven't done everything that I can, making it as far as possible on my side to be at peace. And so today, as we pass the elements, we need to take a serious look inside so that someday we're not surprised by something we left linger. Search our hearts, O God. See if there's any untried way in me. Cleanse me. Make me whole today. As the ushers pass out the communion elements to you, we offer it to any believer in Jesus Christ who's walking in a right relationship. You may want to participate or you may not. That's purely your choice. Make it an issue of your heart. Take the elements and ponder upon what Jesus did for you when you were far and separated.